Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York, Mouth Off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to sit in with us today on The Helping Conversation. I have a very, very special guest and a very, very important topic to talk about, one that those of you who have listened to past episodes of this podcast know is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. From 1999 to 2019, nearly 500,000 people died from an overdose involving any opioid, including prescription and illicit opioids. This took place in some would describe as three waves. The first wave began with an increased prescribing of opioids in the 1990s, with overdose deaths involving prescription overdoses increasing since at least 1999. The second wave began in 2010 with rapid increases in overdose deaths involving heroin. And the third wave began in 2019 with significant increases in overdose deaths involving synthetic opioids, particularly those involving illicitly manufactured fentanyl. To bring the statistics up to date a little bit more, the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics indicates that there were an estimated 100,306 drug overdose deaths in the United States during the 12-month period ending in April 2021, an increase of over 28% from the 78,000 plus deaths during the same period the year before. The new data documents that estimated overdose deaths from opioids increased from 75,673 in the 12-month period ending in April 2021, up from 56,064 the year before. Those numbers are absolutely staggering. And I know sometimes it is easy because substance use disorder is one of the most stigmatized diseases on the face of the earth. It is so easy sometimes to just think, it's just a bunch of addicts and they had control over it and they could say no and go on and on and on with that line of thinking. And so it is so easy for large segments of our society and societies around the world to look the other way, to point the finger of other, and to just say these people did it to themselves without taking a moment to take a step back and think big and think on a complex level about the disease of substance use disorder and addiction and the players involved in this. I was sharing a couple of weeks ago with my guest that I just finished watching that show on TV, Dope Sick, about the, I'm blanking on the name of the family that was behind the overprescription of OxyContin. And it is amazing that over the course of about 4 or 5 episodes that I did not, after each episode, need to buy a new TV because the urge to put my foot through the TV as I watched this. Not only Sackler family was the name of the family, not only just based on who these folks were and how easily they put the dollar over lives, but the narrative that they pushed forward that aided with the stigmatization of substance use disorder and specifically those that suffer from it. It was just absolutely maddening to watch. And so we know we have a lot of work to do. And today I have as a guest one of the folks that is truly in the mix on the highest level in trying to make some things happen here. So let me make sure that I quickly introduce him so we have more than enough time to spend some time in conversation. Robert A. Kent is the General Counsel with the Office of National Drug Control Policy. In this role, Mr. Kent provides overall legal support to all components of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Mr. Kent most recently served as the Vice President of Advocacy and General Counsel for the American Association of Orthodontists and National Healthcare Organization. Prior to that, he served as the General Counsel for the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. This is where Rob and I met. In his role, Rob provided overall legal support, policy guidance, and direction to OASAS Executive Office and all divisions of the agency. He led the OASAS efforts to implement New York State's heroin and opioid task force recommendations, including the Combat Addiction Heroin Campaign, the Federal Opioid Targeted Grant Program, and Medicaid Redesign Team initiatives included implementation of historic legislation to increase access to treatment, include harm reduction services. Robert has co-authored articles on patient confidentiality and sober homes and has presented nationally and throughout New York State on the addiction system of care. In 2011, Rob was recognized by the Caron Foundation with their Legal Professional Public Service Award. In 2013, he was recognized by the Coalition of Behavioral Health Agencies with their Leadership Award. In 2016, Rob was recognized by the American Association for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence with their Niswinder Dole Murray Award, the Long Island Recovery Association Friend of Recovery Award, and the National Tier Providers Coalition Public Service Award. In 2018, Rob was honored by the Friends of Recovery New York with the Charles Devlin Recovery Advocate Award and by Christopher's Reason with the Outstanding Leader in the Recovery Community Award. In 2019, Robert was honored by NYAPRS with its Public Policy Leadership Award and by the MHANYS with their CEO Award. In 2020, Robert was honored by the New York State Justice Center with their Champion Award. Rob is a graduate of the Syracuse University College of Law, and please join me in welcoming into the Helping Conversation, Rob Kent. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Keith. How are you?
I am doing well.
I got to shorten that thing up. It's ridiculous.
Hey, that second paragraph is pretty important because what it says is, and look, we know this is nice when people recognize the hard work that we do. And we get a lot of goodies out of doing the work, but some really, really important people around the country and specifically here in New York hold you in very high esteem, my friend, and I believe you know that.
I do.
So thank you for sitting in and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and to talk about this very important topic. And again, as you know, the focus of the podcast is how you came to be in this conversation. So just really quickly, you're General Counsel, appointed by President Biden, and fill us in a little bit on some of the journey that got you to where you are today.
Well, so I'll go back, and you can tell me if I'm going too far back, but just, and I've started to talk about this because for me, it's always about like, why do people do the stuff they do and how do they end up in places? First off, it starts with good luck, but I grew up in Syracuse, New York, single parent household on welfare in public housing. I'm not in recovery from addiction to drugs or alcohol. But my background is one that I know what it's like to be written off. And I know what it's like for people to not want to help. I also know what it's like for people to reach out the hand and help. So I was lucky. I was pretty good academically, made my way through college, got to Syracuse University College of Law. I was always interested in politics. I worked in the New York State Senate for almost a decade, went into private practice doing lobbying work, which a lot of folks who work in the legislature do. And then worked at the Office of Mental Health in New York State for a couple of years. And then when Eliot Spitzer won the governor's election in 2006, his new commissioner for OASAS asked me to join her to become the General Counsel. And, so from 2007 through 2020, that was my work. And I tell people it took me a long time, but in my 40s, I found like the work that I wanted to do. And, it's the most meaningful work that I've done in my career. And so I left OASAS. Timing was unfortunate. After the first month of COVID, I was supposed to move to St. Louis, which is where the AAO is located, because I wanted to do national advocacy. I liked the folks there. I liked the work, but I never moved to St. Louis. They were closed down, so I worked remote for a little less than a year. And then December of 2020, actually on Christmas Eve, I got an email from the Biden-Harris transition team asking me if I wanted to be considered for the job that I now occupy. And so it's an interesting process, but February 2021, February 2021, right. It's the other thing COVID's done is it's screwed up our reference points. But,
I don't even try.
I became the General Counsel to the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. So, we coordinate drug policy and funding for drug policy for the Biden-Harris administration.
That's awesome. That's a huge position. I'm curious if at I don't know, let's say 10 years ago or sometime when you were maybe just starting out at OASAS, if someone had said you were eventually going to be working for the White House, would you have said, oh, yeah, I see that coming?
I would have said, you're delusional. And it's funny. I thought about it like the first thing I thought about not when they approached me to interview, but when they offered me the job in January of 2021, I thought of my mom, and who's no longer here, and my grandmother. I'm Jewish, so grandmothers and mothers, as you know, are huge in the Jewish family. And she was a high school dropout in the Depression. Got her GED, but worked because the family needed her to work. But she pressed us all. You need to go to school. You need to get an education. I think about, I'm like, not a chance, that I think this would ever happen. And actually not just that, but happen, with somebody I actually respect and admire.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of the president, and I know he knows this stuff as a family member with his own family.
Right.
So, for us, at the State of the Union, just recently when he, talked about his support for the 23 million Americans in recovery, we think that's the first time a president's ever talked about addiction in a State of the Union address.
Really?
And so that was of course, all of us are like, well, now we got to go make stuff happen, because he made the number one issue on his unity agenda to address the overdose epidemic. But it was really cool that he did that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious. I want to get to a question going back a little bit when you were younger, but you brought up President Biden. Was there a need for a great deal of push from you and your colleagues for that to get put into the State of the Union address? Because that's earth shattering for it to be the first president to ever bring this up.
I think there was an interest, but clearly, part of our role is to push right. That's why we're there. He expects his people to push ideas. Any good leader expects their people to push ideas. Ultimately, it's his call, but we knew there was a connection. And look, he sees the same stuff we do. Because actually, to update the stats you gave, the most recent CDC numbers through October of 2021, the 12-month period preceding that, it's 105,000 overdose deaths. So the numbers, and again, it's delayed, but the numbers track up. And we're hopeful we're going to Yeah, that's our goal. I mean, we need to reverse that number and start it on a trend that's consistent while we're here,
Right.
And set up things that make it happen when we're not here.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you told me this when we spoke a couple of weeks ago in the State of the Union address. President Biden actually even mentioned harm reduction, correct?
He did indeed. And because that so in the first year of an administration, you issue in April what's called policy priorities for our office. And we had 7 priorities, and amongst them was expansion and support for harm reduction services. And actually the American Rescue Plan that President Biden put forward and Congress adopted contained the first specific grant. It was $30 million out of SAMHSA for harm reduction services.
Right.
And so, and it's, first off, we believe in harm reduction, but on a moral, ethical level, we believe in it. But there's a pragmatic point to it, which is when you're losing 100,000 people a year, you need to do everything you can to keep people alive.
Right.
And so there's without dispute, so when we say harm reduction services, we mean syringe services programs, naloxone distribution, fentanyl test strips. There's no doubt those are evidence-based interventions and they keep people alive. And just to throw a stat out there, because I know some folks have a hard time with syringe services programs, but 30% of the folks who go to those programs end up going to treatment when they're ready. Right. And most likely, as you know, to succeed when they're ready versus when they're told to go. Yeah. So, we think harm reduction services is one of the keys, mass distribution of naloxone. These are the keys because, as you pointed out, the 70% of that 100,000 is synthetic opioids. Right. So we've got to do everything we can to keep people alive, get them healthier, which is what syringe services programs do. And be there when they're ready to make other changes in their lives. But, ultimately it's about treating addiction like other medical conditions where we engage you and do everything we can to make you healthier. And we don't, kick you out because you don't follow the plan that we've laid out for you.
Right. So I'm thinking we probably can't make a direct connection here, but I'm curious about something now. I just put these two dates together. So here we are at the State of the Union, and President Biden talks about the opioid epidemic, and he talks about harm reduction. And I believe in December of 2021, the first overdose prevention center opened in New York City. And I know that we've been working for years in some different parts of the country to have that happen and keep running into a variety of legal and moral roadblocks. Any chance there's a connection there?
So we're legally for us, we're restricted because there is actually litigation going on in Pennsylvania because there was an effort a number of years ago to try to open up these sites. And right now, the court decisions are that they violate federal law. Right. But we do know, we're obviously aware that New York City opened a couple sites. What my boss would say is, we've got to let Department of Justice sort out the legal questions. But suffice it to say, we've it's really hard at this point to rule anything in or out. Right. When we're losing that many people. So I think to be determined, stay tuned on that. But I guess one point would be they've not been closed.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Right.
So.
Right. Because I'm aware of the history in Pennsylvania, and they haven't even been able to get them open. Right.
Well, what's really sort of bothersome is that the folks in Pennsylvania actually won a lawsuit at the trial level because they were sued. They didn't initiate a lawsuit. They were sued by the previous administration's U.S. attorney in that region. And the trial level decision was, in their favor. but they weren't ready to open a site. And, my understanding is there, obviously, as you would suspect, that not everyone's going to agree with that being an approach. And so there was a lot of opposition. And then the judge who issued the trial court decision basically stopped it, pended it while the decision was being appealed. And then ultimately the appellate courts ruled that it did violate current federal law.
Right. Saddens me when you look at the research that has been done around the world in other countries that have opened these facilities, of the good that it does and the lives that it saves and the people it directs towards treatment. And again, for me, I think just as importantly, changes the narrative about this disease, that it is a disease, and like any other disease, we want to be there to help people stay alive and get better. Yeah. All right. So if we all knew you when you were a kid, long before you were legal counsel, what would have been the evidence? What would we have seen in your behavior and how you conducted yourself and decisions you made at that time in your life that would have told us this gentleman was destined to go into the world and help?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer at a young age. My mom and I used to watch Perry Mason, but no, it would, I always tended to stand up for other people. Did pretty well academically, to be honest. And my grades didn't reflect it in high school, but I think that was as much because, I was bored for most of the classwork. And so, I always was up for a good fight to protect people. Did pretty well academically, got involved in local politics even before I could vote, had really good mentors in the political space. I guess those would be some of the indications, although, I don't know if anyone would have suspected I'd end up here, least of all me. So,
who were some of those, either at that time, at that early moment in your life, or anywhere along the way? Maybe a couple of people that stand out as mentors.
Yeah. So, teachers. We all talk, right? We remember our worst teachers and our best teachers.
Right.
But like my 5th and 6th grade teachers were, they would just talk about how, you have the potential to do anything you want. And when you're hearing that as a, 11, 12, 13-year-old, it sticks with you. And, and I had the ward leader where I grew up, in the Democratic Party was, she sort of took myself and my brother and sister who were younger than me under her wing, got us involved, got us summer jobs. And then ultimately she was my political science teacher in community college and just really pushed, and then, so, I grew up, my dad wasn't present in our life after 13. But my best friend's dad, who, God rest his soul, he was a concentration camp survivor. But he was there. So there was, it takes a village. There was a village for me. And so those people like that because I had plenty of people telling me, you're just not destined for, you're going to have limits because of where you're growing up, and, but that's the other thing for me is probably it's a good quality and maybe not a good quality. I'm incredibly stubborn. So, and I especially react when people tell me what I can't do or what and I think that helps me with this work because I don't ever assume that I have all the right answers. And so I listen to people. And then when people approach me to get help, I'm listening to them. I'm going to help them do whatever they want. I'm not going to tell them what's the best way for them to get better. It's on them, and if they've made a decision, whether or not I agree with it, they're not going to know that. I'm just going to help them. That's if you want people to do the things you know that they should do, you can't start by telling them this is what you need to do. You got to start by saying, how can I help you?
Yeah.
And as you move forward, it's, if it was me, this is how I'd be thinking about it. This is but they need to trust you in order to listen to the words you say after, if it was me.
Right. There's this, one of my favorite books is this book called More Time to Think by Nancy Klein. And talks a lot about what we need to do with each other to be our best conversational partners. And she talks quite a bit about what you're talking about here. And there's a statement in the book that says, the brain that asks the question usually holds the answer. Right?
Well, like I said, I one of our common friends, Steph Campbell, who I love, she calls it radical listening, but it's like, it's listening to people. I've said constantly, given all the work I've done, and we did a lot of sort of fundamental change when I was at OASAS. And I would say to folks, how do you react when somebody tells you what you need to do? And I said, so place yourself in the position of someone who's seeking help for an addiction issue, and then understand how they react sometimes when you're telling, well, this is the way you get better, and this is the only way you get better. Right. And we don't do that in the rest of medicine. No. It's like, here's what's going on. Here are the things we could do. How do we come together to pick out the course of action? And then if you don't follow the plan in healthcare, other than addiction, they don't kick you out of treatment. No. They wrap their arms around you tighter.
That's
How
right.
do we get you back? What do we need to do to help you get to a good place?
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do, and we need to do with addiction. We need to offer people the help they're willing to accept, work with them to get them to ask for more.
Yeah.
And as the folks we're talking about, you can't tell them how terrible they are. They already know. They don't, you don't need to shame them. You don't need to, it's just, they hate themselves. You got to help them love themselves, and you've got to help them see what's possible for them, but they're not going to do it until, because they also, as we know, right, how many folks have been victimized as part of their drug addiction.
Yes.
And so they don't trust people.
Right.
So building that trust, and the most important thing to me is like shutting up and listening to them.
Yeah. But I think, as a helper in this field, that piece, I understand that often folks who've struggled with addiction have experienced other traumas in their life and things like that. And I get that. What angers me no end is when part of that trauma has been moments that they have been in front of other helping people. Who've done some of what you were just talking about, who've told them what they need to do and how to do it, and don't want to treat them like a true resource in their own life.
Well, when I was at OASAS, we oversaw the disciplinary process for CASACs,
right,
for credentialed alcohol substance counselors. And I was not nice to be around when I found a case when somebody was clearly a predator.
Yeah.
And they were working in a program, and, because I used to say this to folks is, the folks don't complain to us because they know they won't be trusted because of their history. Mm-hmm. As so many folks with addiction issues have a criminal history. They've done things that make people want to not trust them. But I went after people who were clearly predators because they chose to work in this field to do that because they knew they could probably get away with it.
Right.
And that bothered me to such a degree. I mean, I wouldn't settle with people like that. I want your credential, and then I'm going to put you in a national database because you are unfit to be working in the helping professions.
Right. Yeah, good. Well, that's good to hear. Because that That part drives me personally crazy. You made this statement to me when we talked a couple of weeks ago, and you and I were talking about stigma and substance use disorder, and you said we don't trust the people who need the help, and we don't trust them with what they tell us.
Yeah. Well, look, and we know, right? They don't. I've had many a clinician in a program tell me there's the person I meet, and there's the person they are, but we figure that out as we go along. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that we cast them off because they haven't told us everything. Some of it is incredibly painful to talk about.
Right.
And they don't know you.
Right. Well, that.
Are we going to, I would say to folks, like, tell me your deepest, darkest secret. And they look at me like I got 4 heads. And I'm like, well, that's what you're doing to somebody who shows up at your treatment program.
Right.
You can't start by asking them the worst things that have ever happened in their lives and expect them to any great degree to sit there and take it. They get up and leave.
Right.
And, and I keep saying this all the time now, addiction's a human condition. We're all human. I think what's helped us some level is so many people, unfortunately, have been impacted by addiction, or they know somebody that has. I think it changes their perspective. But, we got to approach this like we're helping other human beings.
Right. Yeah. Look, it's that whole concept of autonomy, of treating people with autonomy, that it's their life, and we trust I'm in this I find myself in this conversation at times, and it drives me crazy around some of the older, antiquated thinking about these concepts of denial and resistance, and people don't want to get better. I've never met anybody who has struggled with addiction who wasn't the person on the face of the earth, the most motivated to find recovery. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of my best friends was in long-term recovery. She would say to me, people will say to us, we're unmotivated, unfocused. She's like, I was the most focused and motivated person on the face of the earth. My focus and motivation were just in the wrong place. Right. But when I was addicted and needed drugs, I would figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's trying to turn that motivation to more healthy, healthy living.
Yeah. So I want to move a little bit, but stay within this world of listening and relationship building, because we can talk about this in terms of those that work with folks struggling with substance use disorder. But I'm so curious for you in your role, because here you are talking about this topic that there is a range of opinion about and some pretty strong feeling about. You are in the world of politics, and we know what our political landscape looks like these days in terms of people's abilities to work together about much of anything. So I'm curious, in your role and bringing listening and relationship building into it, what that is like for you in bringing about consensus about how to move forward around this topic.
Well, so I will say, as it goes in Washington and with Congress, this is one of the few issues where there is some level of bipartisan support for doing things. But by that same token, not everybody supports everything. So, and I learned this from just working in the legislature and negotiating laws, and then working at OASAS. And I have big goals, always did, but I've never gone at this like it's that or nothing. Because, see, in my world, in my head, if we just want absolutes, it can very much be no. And then we haven't helped anybody. And so when I constantly tell folks who are very passionate, and I get it, the system's not set up to make monumental change quickly. It just isn't.
Right.
It's the nature of our democracy. But I would rather, like visually for me, it's a ladder. I'd rather take a few steps up the rungs and then start from there the next time. Then I'm like, I want to climb the whole ladder and you won't let me. And so we're just going to agree to disagree. So much of the work and the progress we made at OASAS, and I think what we'll make at the national level, is being willing to accept finding common ground that moves you forward and then working from there. But it isn't that I don't believe where we should get to, but I can't, in my honest judgment, focus there and not be willing to move forward, but maybe not get to where we want to, but ultimately get there.
So in your experience so far in this role in the political landscape, what have you found to be some of the common ground?
Well, and I think you've seen some of it. So we pretty early on, as you and your audience probably know, to access buprenorphine for opioid use disorder, it's one of the 3 medications.
Right.
There's a federal system in place. You need what's called an X waiver from DEA and HHS. But there was that law was written a couple decades ago and has been in place for a long period of time, but we knew that there was a section in it that allowed leadership at HHS to develop like an out of some type of practice guidelines that effectively would allow certain access to this medication without going through the full-blown X waiver process. And so we developed those practice guidelines, and there was support at the DEA, there was support at HHS, and we made that happen, and that significantly increased access to buprenorphine. The emergency relief that was put into place as a result, because of COVID, which the 2 key pieces in the addiction space is they then allowed buprenorphine to be prescribed through audio-only meetings between the doctor or the prescriber and the patient. Prior to COVID, you had to be face-to-face.
Right.
And so the previous administration, to their credit, enacted emergency relief under the COVID public health emergency. The beauty for us is we then had a base of it was done since, like March and April of 2020, and it worked. So we use that, and we're using it now to make those rules permanent, because we now have evidence that they didn't increase bad outcomes in any way. They produce good outcomes, and they significantly enhance the ability of people to access medication for opioid use disorder. Same thing with methadone. They increase the take-home doses, and we're making those permanent because they work. Right. So there's, we got mobile methadone rules. So the DEA promulgated rules last August to allow opioid treatment programs where, you can get methadone for addiction,
right,
to now go out and get mobile vans. And so they could reach communities that can't make it to their clinics. So, and that's just it. It's like identifying places where we agree. And because, the other thing is we don't kid ourselves. We got a short window, right?
Yeah.
President's got 4 years. If we're blessed that he runs another term and wins, we might get another 4, but you can't count on that. So, we're all about like doing everything we can in the limited window that we have. And so it's those kinds of things, increasing access to treatment, supporting harm reduction. One other cool things that I love is my office, the General Counsel's office, we write model state laws, and then we go out and try to sell them to the state. So we've written one model act to try to create consistency about how people can access naloxone, the reversal drug,
right?
Because the states are all over the place.
Because if I'm correct, Rob, there's some states where you can only get that with a prescription, and some states where that's not true. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, correct. I mean, you're exactly right, and that's why we did it. The states are all over the place, so we wanted to create a law where basically you can have a statewide standing order. So, like we did that in New York. So there's a doc at the Department of Health in New York, who basically wrote a prescription for the state of New York and all its residents. So, and then you would go, as you know, New York's very different than most states. New York created a system through the Department of Health where there's overdose trainers all over the state. Right. And you go to one of them, they're using that standing order to give you a kit after you took the training.
Oh, I did not know that. That's neat.
That's the legal foundation. And then we issued a statewide order so that pharmacies could stock it and hand it out as well so there was already a standing order / prescription at every pharmacy. But some states, you have to go to a physician, you have to get a prescription,
right.
You have to hope the pharmacy stocking it. So, and to be honest, that's like one of our big keys is to significantly expand access to naloxone. Because if we're trying to engage people and keep them alive, sometimes it starts with them having been reversed with Narcan,
right,
or naloxone,
right,
to then get to them. Right. So that's one model act. Another one is to support at the state level the opening of syringe services programs.
Right.
They are evidence-based. People can go look it up. They help people's health care. They make people healthier. They help people connect to services, whatever it might be, including treatment. And they work. And, one of the things they do as well when they're run well is they significantly reduce the outbreak of HIV and all the different HEPs, because most of that occurs through the use of people using needles, multiple people using the same needle. So, and then like the newest thing that we just put out, which I'm really thrilled about, is to create a statewide infrastructure for folks to be deflected out of the criminal justice system for basically crimes connected to drug use or possession for drug use. Get them out of the system. The criminal justice system is not the place for them to be.
Yeah. Well, it is not the place for them to be. I want to back up on something you said just because I want to make sure people understand it, because maybe not everybody listening does. So there are a couple of medications right now that are used to treat opioid use disorder, and methadone is one and Suboxone is the other. And even within my field, there is great stigma about the use of those medications. And that stigma is born of an incredibly archaic narrative about what recovery is, which is recovery has to include absolute abstinence from all substances and medications, you name it. And yet when you talk to the folks in the addiction psychiatry world who are really the experts on this, they will tell you that the research is off the charts on the efficacy of using these medications to help treat opioid use disorder.
So two things on that. First, when I was at OASAS, I was, which my staff hated, but I'm an early riser. So I get up and so I pulled up Twitter on a Sunday morning, and there was a whole narrative going about how the treatment system is abstinence-based, and that contributes to the increase in overdose deaths because some people aren't ready to stop using.
Right.
And so I was like, well, we don't do that in New York. So I pulled up our outpatient rules, and I did a word search for abstinence, and sure as heck, abstinence was the goal of treatment. So I started doing a red line, and that I deleted that sentence and started to delete a whole bunch more. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to waste my whole Sunday. So I sent it to my staff and I said, here's a start. We're going to rewrite the rules. And so I took abstinence out as the goal of treatment. Now, that doesn't mean abstinence can't be the goal of treatment, but that's the person's choice. If that's what they want, then let's work with them there. So we started to rewrite the rules, eliminating a mandate that in order to get the medication, you have to agree to mandatory counseling, that if you continue to use, they'll kick you out of treatment because you're continuing to use other substances. And again, I viewed it like That's how medicine treats other health conditions.
That's
they
right.
don't kick you out of treatment for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, right.
They engage you because they want to keep you alive. Well,
Yeah.
we need to do the same. And you're absolutely right. I used to get really agitated. We can't run around and say addiction's a chronic medical condition and then not treat it like that ourselves.
We do, and we've talked out of both sides of our mouths forever.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just started forcing people. You know, it was really fascinating. We rewrote the rules. I did a road show, and this doctor at one of these sites, we were talking about the new rules, said, well, what do I do if the person won't stop using other substances? And I said, well, what do you do when you're trying to get somebody well? Everything you can, right?
Right.
And you know what? And I said, you know, at some point, your program might not be the right one for them. So find them a different program. And I said something that really, I guess, shocked people. I was like, well, if they're not ready, what about referring them to a harm reduction, a syringe services program?
Yeah, right.
You know, but yeah, the medications are, there's three actually, right? There's buprenorphine,
Yep.
methadone, and Vivitrol.
Right.
Is injectable naltrexone, and they work.
Yeah.
The science is there. They absolutely work. Now, I say that they work to stabilize you, but as we both know, right, I don't believe anybody is going to sustain recovery for any length of time until they engage in therapy with a counselor.
Right.
They just, because, you know, I constantly say there's a reason why people use substances. And it isn't because they're predisposed, by the way. That just makes it more likely they become dependent or addicted on them.
Right.
But it's not why. It's untreated mental health. It's trauma. It's, you know, lack of hope. They don't have a job. They don't have so there's all these things, right, that drive people to do it. And the scary thing is the substances on the street nowadays are lethal, but very effective in capturing somebody and getting control of them and changing their lives.
Right. Yeah. It's, you know, I had breakfast a couple of weeks ago with an esteemed and longtime colleague of mine who holds on to some of these older ideas, and it was a maddening conversation to have with him as he is telling me that, you know, treatment needs to be abstinence based, and kind of talked with some sarcasm in his voice about the role of peers, and it's maddening.
Well, they've changed the world, by the way, and you know that.
What's
right?
that?
The peers have changed.
Yes, they have.
The treatment programs that embrace peers, it changes the culture in the program for the better.
Yes.
And by the way, the biggest thing I can do as an attorney and as a counsel for the people that you just mentioned who have this point of view, that's not based in science, by the way.
But not at all.
But you know what? I rewrite the rules, so I make them do things that they don't have to do. And what I've said to plenty of people, if it's not for you, go find a different job.
Yeah.
Well, because if you're okay with that approach, you're okay with a lot of people dying because you don't help them.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with it.
Well, I will tell you, Rob, in in the case of this specific person, I believe you were probably in on this rule. The fact that in New York State right now, to keep your certification as a treatment program from OASAS, you need to have hired peers, right?
Yep.
And
we forced it.
And this person right now is dealing with the dilemma that he does not have a peer on board. He's dragging his feet, and OASAS won't update his certificate. And we have this conversation. Well, then do the right thing.
I love people in recovery, but to me, it was as much pragmatic. They are so great at engaging people on their terms and helping, and I say peers, and you train peers, you and Lori, I know that. So to me, the peer is like in the car with you, but you're driving it. They're just keeping you on the road.
That's it.
But it's your choice. You figure out what's best for you, and they will help you find that place.
Yeah.
And they're a person you can connect to. And and they've probably most likely walked the same path you're walking right now.
That's it.
They won't. And that's why we mandated it. But, the other thing is, and again, this is where you use your law degree and being an attorney and the counsel. We required insurance to pay for them before we asked programs to include them in the team. We made Medicaid and private insurance pay for peer services. Again, the thing I focused in on at the beginning of the opioid epidemic was if we didn't change fundamentally the way we do business, people were going to die in unbelievably high numbers because the drugs were lethal. And it wasn't like it used to be where you could have these abstinence only and all these crazy rules.
Right.
And you kick people out, they would come back. Now, if you kick people out, you're going to see their obituary probably in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. 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 Look, when we do the training, you talked about when Lori and I do that training and we talk about language and stigma and we bring up that, that horrendous statement that I still hear at times today about, well, people need to go out and hit bottom. Well, we know, and with opioid use especially, bottom is dead for a lot of people.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you can still find it on OASAS's YouTube channel, but I taped a lot of things. One of the things that I was most proud of, I taped a segment with family members, and two of them have sons who are still alive. And one couple's son died from overdose and neglect of the treatment system and the healthcare system. And it's Bill Williams is his name. And Bill said, rock bottom's underground. Yeah. There's this hit rock bottom. Yeah. They die. That's what rock bottom is nowadays. Yeah.
Look, that all of this, the punitive narratives that have been a part of the discourse around substance use disorder forever and still to this day, those are the narratives we have to weed out and we have to get them out, and because that's what this is all about. It's these people need to be punished, and so if
and I tell people the benefit of the job I'm in is I don't need to win your heart and mind. Yeah. I'm going to force you to do the right thing. And hopefully you figure out on your own it was the right thing. And if you don't, I'll punish you, or you can leave the system.
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Right.
We don't need people like that in this system.
Yeah.
And I will say, and you still see, New York's I can tell you now from my current job, New York's very different than most other states. But we're still like, when we say abstinence is the goal, it's the equivalent of tying one arm behind your back because you're trying to engage in a fist fight. It's like you're not going to win. You're going to get beat up. And so we just, again, I like wake up every day. I know people that I knew were here a year ago who are gone.
Yeah.
And I know people I've met their kids. They're not here anymore. I helped them get to treatment and it worked. And then they had one slip.
Right.
And I've met so many parents who've lost. And that just, I don't know. I'm really close to a lot of the families, as you know.
Right.
I feel that, I don't know what it feels like because I've not had that happen to me.
Yeah.
But I know loss and I know how painful it is for them. And I know how hard they fight so that people don't end up in that circumstance. So,
Look, I've
been accused of being a little passionate. That's okay.
You're a lot passionate, and you should be. This world needs your passion. But when you say that you don't have your own history as someone in your own recovery. And when we train recovery coaches, we always talk about that empathy is not shared experience; it's shared emotion. And that the best coaches are people who can, even if I have had a different experience, you're talking about pain or loss or shame, I can dig up something from my life somewhere and go there, and that's what creates connection. So listen, I'm looking at the clock, and of course we could go on for another hour, and we're running out of time here. So I just want to ask a couple of other questions.
Sure.
You are clearly not only passionate about this specific topic, but you're passionate about public service. And so if there were some folks out there listening, whether they are in the law field or others, and find themselves having that passion for public service and just getting started in their career, maybe what might be some words of wisdom?
Well, so, and I'm now 60. So, I say to folks, well, first off, I always love public service. And I get rewarded financially better than I ever thought I could be in public service. Is it what you can make in the private sector? No, but I come home every day feeling rewarded and feeling good about the work I do. So, and I constantly tell young folks that if doing good matters to you, get into public service, do internships when you're going through school, network with people. But if you want to do meaningful work that impacts people's lives in a positive way, the best way to do that is to work in the public sector. And so, like I said, I've spent most of my career in it. And, this work in particular, the last 15 years has, rewarded me beyond that I should be rewarded.
Awesome. What would you say? Last two questions. First one, the most, maybe the most challenging aspect to you of doing this work.
Oh, there's my dogs upstairs. Sorry. The most challenging is, still continuing to get everybody to move forward, to make that progress. There's still folks that, aren't bought in. So but I don't consider it challenging in a bad way, because we just keep working at it. But that not everybody's on the same page, and that we're not making the progress that we need to be making as quickly as we can.
Right. And flip side, and maybe much more importantly, the most rewarding aspect of doing this work.
So the most rewarding, and I'll put it to an example. So I have a friend in New York, approached me a number of years ago. His son was, using heroin, had co-occurring mental health issues, a lot of anxiety, and all the stuff that comes with that. He, almost bankrupted the family. And I remember, they approached me and asked if I could help them find treatment for their son. And the fourth time was a charm. We found him 3 programs. He walked in and walked out within the first 24 hours. And, I said to them, we will keep at it until he finds the right place. The 4th time worked. And he's now multi-years in recovery. He's actually a CASAC now, working in the field.
Yeah.
And so, seeing what happens to folks when they find that, their recovery, and just, to me, that I still do that stuff. I still get contacted and help people find treatment. And to see somebody, and remember where they were at and where they're at now, it's just, it's just totally different. And it's so rewarding that, and it's funny because I told the family, they're like, well, you saved my kid's life. I said, no. I made it possible for them to save their own lives. They did the work. I didn't do the work.
Yeah.
So being able to make that possible and then seeing it is just immensely rewarding.
Yeah. That's awesome. That keeps it keeps us getting up every morning and doing this work.
Right.
That's for sure. Right. Rob Kent, General Counsel within the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is a part of the Executive Office of the President. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for the work that you are doing. I look at folks who do what you do, and I think I personally could not do it. I would eventually tell someone so quickly to fuck off somewhere. And folks like you, your ability to be patient and consensus build, and as you said, move the conversation along slowly. That's never been a skill set of mine. So I just so admire what the kind of work that you do. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks, Keith.
And we will let's make an agreement. We'll catch up somewhere and maybe do another episode in a year or so and see where things are at then. That would be great.
Look forward to it.
Good, because I just feel like we did not have enough time.
Very good.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that and learned something and was inspired by it. And maybe if you are somebody who loves somebody with a substance use disorder, or you yourself are struggling with substance use disorder, to please hear the message from Rob in his work that you are worth it and you are human, and that the system that sometimes has not treated you all that well is the one that really, really needs to change and look in the mirror. And I believe we're moving in a really good direction on the macro level, the kind of work that Rob is doing, as well as all of many of my colleagues that are doing the work on the street, on the front line. Please, please, please find help. And if you're a family member, do not hesitate to reach out for support and help. As I always say, the most complicated relational state known to humankind is to love somebody with every fiber of your being who is struggling with active addiction. Please find support for yourself. It's really, really important. Well, again, thank you for sitting in with us today and making the time. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you're able to join us again when we meet to have another conversation with another helping person, as we will continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Have a good day, everybody.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the Helping Conversation.